This is an incredibly important video. The Labour government have launched a consultation into a future policy they plan to launch into law within the United Kingdom, and Andy Burnham has already committed to pursuing this exact same policy as well. Now, the crux of the issue is that the Labour government are losing on social media. They are deeply unpopular, and independent channels like what you're watching with me right now on YouTube, we're getting too much attention and we're damaging the polling of the Labour Party. So what the Labour government want to do, and what they've now announced they're going to do, in fact, and they're running this consultation to gather the appropriate pretext to try and justify it and claim that it's democratic, is de-rank and censor channels on YouTube that do not belong to public service broadcasters. That means the BBC, ITV, and Channel 4. Essentially, they're going to make it harder and maybe even impossible for you to find content from independent content creators online like myself, and instead try and force you to watch the BBC even on YouTube, even if you're watching on TikTok or on Facebook or anywhere else as well. This is an incredibly important issue, so I do implore you to watch this video and also to click the link down below in the description where you can sign a feedback form and tell the government what you really think about this awful power grab. Now, if you want the news that legacy media won't show you, like and comment under this video for the algorithm while you still can, and subscribe to the channel as well. Or you can join my Substack to see the content I'm not allowed to post on YouTube by clicking the link in the description down below.
Do not skip this. The government is preparing to force you to consume BBC and establishment media content to the top of your social media feeds by law. Yes, you could be force-fed what I would call government propaganda and state-controlled media by default, and they're trying to do it by controlling and forcing social media companies to manipulate their algorithms. This is Orwellian nightmare fuel in real-life Britain.
Secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause.
Well, that's Apple's 1984 themed Macintosh commercial there, giving us what I think is an insight into what life in Britain will or can be like. The government want to counter so-called misinformation by trusted news from the BBC and perhaps other state-owned media like Channel 4. They want to give them undue prominence on social media, or those that peddle their narrative. Just a reminder that the BBC itself has spread fake news and misinformation on countless occasions. It has a track record, even tracing back to 1984, when the BBC edited miners' strike footage out of sequence to falsely show protesters attacking police first. It acknowledged 7 years later that its mistake was made, and they said was made in the haste of putting the news together. That was their excuse, rather than a deliberate attempt to mislead. Well, in 2023, the BBC incorrectly reported the reason for Nigel Farage's bank account closure. They later amended and apologised, of course. Then there's the famous Trump panorama edit. The Beeb spliced clips from his January the 6th speech to falsely imply he directly called for violence in the Capitol. BBC apologised, they pulled the programme, then their Director General had to resign, and Trump is now suing them for billions. And what about the 2025 Gaza documentary? It was called Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. That was narrated by the son of a Hamas official without any disclosure. It was, of course, ruled materially misleading. The BBC pulled it and ordered an on-air statement. There are hundreds of examples of this. I can't list them all here tonight. In fact, the BBC's own BBC Verify, its unit designed to combat misinformation, has been caught peddling misinformation itself. It's mental. This new government's proposal is a pure act of tyranny. It is designed to control you, your family, your friends on an industrial scale. Basically, what they want is for you to be sheep. This is not the act of a confident democracy. It is the action of the political liberal elite class that is losing control of their biased narratives. And one word, if you're a lefty watching this, be warned. One day, there will be a right-wing government, and they too will be able to manipulate this law. Joining me now is technology and free speech lawyer Preston Byron. Preston, thank you so much for joining me this evening. This law, that if it passes, which I think it probably will, is terrifying. It will tell people or force the news, no matter whether they like it or not, from the BBC, perhaps Channel 4 or other broadcasters, to the top of their feeds, based on what the government likes. What do we make of that?
Well, it's not a law yet. It's a proposal for a consultation in very, typical British fashion, where they talk about something for 2 years before they actually do anything concrete. But I think what it is exactly that. There's limited eyeball space on mainstream social media. There's a problem in that the British traditional broadcasters offer lots of content online for free, including the BBC. But the problem is it's as boring as watching paint dry. I was looking at the BBC One schedule this morning, and part of their prime morning coverage was the Irish food tour, talking about Northern Irish digestive biscuits, which is fascinating stuff. And I think I'd rather go have teeth pulled than watch it. So basically, it's a competitive issue. And so what the British government's going to try to do, it seems, is rent space for free on channels like YouTube or Meta or X or other things, and force those platforms, which are based in the United States, to give prominence to state-funded or state-regulated broadcasters like Channel 4, Channel 5, ITV, BBC, all that jazz, because they're losing in the marketplace of ideas, because they're not producing compelling long-form content. And even if you look at BBC One's content from today, if you tally up how much original news content they're doing, and I have the schedule right in front of me for your viewers, it's 20 minutes of original news content. And your program alone, for example, will cover this very important topic much more comprehensively than that will. And there are loads of independent creators on YouTube who are going to cover this topic much more comprehensively than the Beeb will. But if, for example, this proposal became law, basically it would say that you have to give priority to the short form news content sponsored by the state rather than the in-depth content which is being produced by individuals.
Preston, what does that do to Britain if the government have their way? Why should people be worried about this?
Well, they should be worried about it because it's the British government seeking to influence and control the marketplace of ideas. In the United States, we guard freedom of speech very jealously. And what that really means, there are a lot of people, Brits have sometimes a difficult time understanding what it means because the concepts that we have don't exist in the UK. But what it essentially means is that the government doesn't get to make decisions about what people talk about in either direction, right? We trust the people of the United States and our fellow citizens to arrive at the truth through a process of discourse and rational inquiry, and we don't punish people or prioritize content that the state approves of on pain of fines and penalties in prison. So that's essentially what it means. The Brits haven't had that for a long time. They've been moving in a very censorial direction for a long time, and this is just the kind of latest instance of a 30-year process that really started under the Blair government, where the British government has asserted more and more control over the marketplace of ideas in an incremental fashion. And so, you say it's very Orwellian. I think the current state of the UK is actually fairly Orwellian, and this is just a logical extension of that.
Preston, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Really, really important stuff we're talking about here tonight. Thank you. Please come back again and join us soon. My panel on this one as well. Kazra, I think Preston hit on a good point there. This seems like it's been going on for a very long time. Back to Blair when he was enforcing some of these laws like public communications laws that we've doubled down on and mixed into other parts of legislation across the board, which have been now weaponised. We arrest more people for social media crimes than anywhere else in the world, according to records. There's lots of things people should be worried about now. The government, basically, I don't care whether it was a right-wing government or a left-wing government, I'd be outraged by this, deciding...
Rightly so, by the way.
Yes. Is it right that any government has this kind of overreach?
Absolutely not. And the thing that worries me the most, this is in many ways even beyond state-run propaganda or state-run misinformation. It's left-wing misinformation, because actually if you objectively analyse the BBC and Channel 4, their coverage is far more left-wing than the government itself. They actually disagree with some of the government's positions. They disagree with UK law. For example, they refuse to call Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist organisations. They refuse to call the October 7th terrorist attacks. So they present this veneer of objectivity, but actually if you look at the staff, if you look at the editorial, it is extremely left-wing. I've personally had investigations that if they were going to be aired on the BBC, say on Islamist extremism, there would be pushback. Whereas I was told if this was on about the far right, this would be straight out the door. So these institutions in and of themselves are not objective. They are left wing, a pretty far left wing, and that's what concerns me the most. If the government is controlling the algorithm to ensure that these left wing outlets come out on top, then that's going to affect the views of the population. It's effectively a soft form of indoctrination.
Yeah, Lisa, the working class across the country as well, this is where I feel they target people. I feel they target the working class, people who are less likely to really want to get stuck into the news, perhaps, actually, but by records. I'm not saying most working class people don't. I'm just saying there is a higher percentage of people in the educated sphere that like to get involved in the news. Is this a target on the working class?
That's the problem. We've been talking, we always talk about DEI, don't we? And diversity. The problem is in all elite circles, cultural elites, in the news, in politics, in the media, there are a very slim group of people, and they occupy all of that space, and they have a very slim view of the world. And we've seen that actually with the pro-Palestine, because they've had a very slim view of the world. We've seen it with the trans activism as well. So what we've got, I'm not sure it's the vehicles of the BBC or Channel 4 that's a problem. What I am saying is that we've got this elite, they are cultural elites, and they are squatting in all these different institutions, whether they're the police, the BBC, the NHS.
And they disagree with UK law. You had one of the BBC's editors actually saying there was a recording. She was saying, oh, actually, there's a political arm of Hamas and there's a military arm, and that's against UK law. Hamas is a terrorist organisation.
But this is about this group of people with these ideas. Universities are exactly the same as well. I work in universities. You know, I push this idea that we have critical thinking.
Doesn't exist anymore.
This elite group don't want critical thinking. No, they want an idea that things are wrong.
Yes, well, if you don't teach critical thinking, people can't actually look at and say, actually, is this true or not? Is this true or not? That's why we encourage on this channel free speech, so you can hear both sides of the argument.
And so that's why I would argue that it's not the vehicle. It's actually the ideology of this elite.
I agree with that. Well, look, these are currently proposals, Will. They're going through a consultation at the moment. YouTube put out the message. I showed that up at the top here, just so people can see even these big tech companies are worried about it because they don't want government interference. And, of course, if the government had their way with it, the fact that they're asking for this, in my opinion, the fact they're even putting a proposal out shows that they are willing to do it. And that's what worries me the most. BBC is a massive cost to the licence fee holder. Basically, if you own a laptop, or the licence fee pretty much covers everything. You can watch live TV on it. It's basically mandatory. What does this mean for people?
Well, also with the licence fee point, they've actually been extending it. So if you watch Netflix, you watch Amazon Prime, you watch Disney Plus. Well, the BBC wants a bit of money from you, and I'm not surprised in many ways because, as we were saying earlier, this has been going on for a very, very long time. The Communications Act under Blair, the Online Safety Act under the Tories carried over by the Labour Party, the growth of regulatory quangos around media and the like. And I think that anybody who is seriously thinking that these proposals are well-intentioned or they're about protecting kids, like with the social media ban as well, for example, that's just another way of censorship and digital ID through the back door, in my view. I think this, involving themselves in big tech companies and involving themselves in what people can see, is actually not just Orwellian and authoritarian, it's exactly what totalitarian states do.
Yeah, and just a reminder for people, China does this sort of stuff, by the way. China does this sort of stuff with their social media companies. They control the algorithms so they are fed a certain type of narrative, which I believe is indoctrination. I believe it is what Apple showed in that video. It is there to make you into sheep. Eventually, whether it happens in your generation or the next one, it's so they win in the long run. That is my concern. That should never be allowed in a Western democracy. Kazra, we see this across extremist countries all around the world, and it feels to me that rather than us embracing our natural, when I say liberal values, I mean liberty, the liberties of it, the classic liberty, classic liberalism, where we want people to be free-thinking, want people to question what the government does and hold them accountable, that we're slowly moving away from that.
Absolutely, and that's when our society thrives, by the way, when we're championing those classic liberalism, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, to be able to critically analyse.
And disagreement.
Absolutely.
This worries me a lot about disagreement. I mean, Lisa Nandy this week, our culture secretary, has just announced that she's coming off Twitter.
She has, yeah.
Now, that means that I worry about government ministers who seem to be so distant and disconnected from the rest of us that even if they now remove themselves from social media platforms, what is it that they will actually know?
Well, I'll put this back to you, Kazra, as well, because one of the things that people might say to me is that, Alex, actually, in times of crisis, we do need people like the BBC to be up front and centre. When if there's an attack on Britain, the government need to be directly communicating. Is there an argument to be made for what the government might be proposing?
If there's a time of crisis, first and foremost, the government needs to prioritise our defence, our national security. It should be intervening in those issues, those matters, prioritising those issues. And you look at the reality, and the government has been turning its back on defence, turning its back on our national security. These forms of intervention only go down one path, and that's a dangerous path, an authoritarian path. I'm not suggesting that we're going to become communist China or the Islamist regime in Iran, but the very preventing...
It's a slow creep, isn't it, though?
Absolutely, and it can creep through.
And the problem is, sorry to interrupt, and the problem is that also when these laws are implemented, they're very rarely removed.
Yes.
They're very rarely removed.
And it'll only get worse.
Exactly.
Right. Look, a Department for Culture, Media and Sport spokesperson told GB News this: it's right that we look at ways to make it easier for people to discover trusted news sources on social media due to the threats posed by disinformation. We want to ensure any social media prominence system will be proportionate and maintains a diverse news landscape that features a wide range of voices. That's why in the coming months we'll be working alongside the industry to explore how a prominence regime for news content could operate, and we invite all interested parties to feed in their views through our consultation. What do you make of
My mission with this channel is to provide the real news the legacy media won't show you, but unfortunately there are some things I'm just not allowed to say here, and recently more and more of my videos have been getting demonetized and censored, so I've launched an email newsletter covering the news that I'm not allowed to talk about here. So if you want to learn the truth about the establishment they don't want you to see, join my Substack by clicking the button on screen right now.